Hi, this is Birds and I'm Wren. If you love birds like me, then stick around. Last time we looked at the sparrowhawk, how it hunts, how it survives, and why it's so good at what it does. Today, we're flipping the perspective. This is what it's like to be hunted. Small birds live with a constant threat of predation. Sparrowhawks are just one of the many predators they'll face, as well as cats, larger raptors, corvids, weasels, and others all hunt small birds. But sparrowhawks are specialists and they're persistent. From the perspective of a small bird, survival depends on two things: detecting early threats. From the perspective of a small bird, survival depends on two things: detecting threats early and reacting fast. Detection comes first. Small birds need to be constantly vigilant. Even when feeding, they're scanning their surroundings, listening for alarm calls, watching for a movement. This vigilance is instinctive and continuous. It has to be, because the cost of missing one of these things is the threat of death. Sparrowhawks rely on surprise, which means their attacks are designed to minimize detection time. They'll use cover, hedges, fences, buildings, to mask their approach. They fly low and fast, often hugging the ground or a structure, staying out of sight until the last possible moment. When a sparrowhawk does appear, prey birds react instantly. The first bird to spot a hawk often gives the alarm call, a sharp, high-pitched note that carries well and is immediately recognised by the other birds. The call varies by species, but the functions are the same: a warning. Within a fraction of a second, every bird in the area responds. The response is dramatic. Birds feeding on the ground or in bushes explode into cover. Birds in the open scatter into all directions. Birds already in cover freeze, pressing themselves against branches or foliage, becoming as still and inconspicuous as possible. This is the moment most people notice, if they notice at all. One moment the garden was full of birds, suddenly it's silent and empty. No movement, no calls, just stillness. The reaction is so fast and so coordinated that it seems choreographed, but it's not. Each bird is responding to the alarm call, to the sight of the hawk, or to the panic flight of the other birds. It's a cascade of individual responses that looks like it's a collective response because everyone is reacting to the same stimulus at the same time. For sparrowhawks, this reaction is a problem. Once prey birds are alerted to their presence and have reached cover, the advantage of surprise is gone. Sparrowhawks rarely succeed in catching birds that have already reacted. The attack relies on catching the prey off guard, and once that window closes, the hawk usually moves on. This is why alarm calls are so effective. By warning others, the first bird to spot the hawk reduces the success rate of the attack. It's not altruism. The bird giving the alarm is also reducing its own risk. By triggering this collective response, it confuses and disperses the flock, but this also benefits everyone. Not all alarm calls are the same. Birds have different calls for different threats. Aerial predators like sparrowhawks trigger sharp, high-frequency calls. Ground predators like cats trigger different calls, often lower, more drawn out. This allows the bird to respond appropriately. An aerial predator requires different evasion tactics rather than a ground predator. Research has shown that some species can even distinguish between different types of aerial predators. A sparrowhawk is more dangerous than a buzzard in most contexts because sparrowhawks actively hunt small birds, whereas buzzards mostly don't. Some birds adjust their response based on the specific threat, and this level of discrimination isn't universal. The ability to recognize and to respond to predators is partly innate and partly learned. Juvenile birds have an instinctive response to certain visual cues. fast-moving shapes, specific silhouettes, but they refine their responses through experience. Birds that survive repeated encounters with sparrowhawks become better at detecting them and reacting quickly. This learning happens individually and socially. Young birds learn by watching adults. If adults alarm and flee, juveniles do the same, even if they haven't seen the threat themselves. Over time, they learn which situations are genuinely dangerous and which are false alarms. False alarms do happen. Birds sometimes react to non-threatening stimuli, a pigeon flying past, a piece of debris blown by the wind, or a harmless crow. These mistakes are costly in terms of energy and lost feeding time, but they're less costly than failing to react to a real threat. In an environment where sparrowhawks are present, it's better to overreact than underreact. Once the immediate threat has passed, the sparrowhawk has moved on, or the attack has failed, birds begin to emerge from cover. This happens gradually, not all at once. The first birds to emerge are usually the most dominant and the most confident. Others wait, watching, and only resume activity once they're certain the threat has gone. This caution is necessary because sometimes sparrowhawks return. A hawk that fails on the first pass might quickly circle back and try again from a different angle. Prey birds that emerge too quickly are vulnerable to this tactic. Eventually, normal activity resumes. Birds return to feeding, calling, and interacting. The garden refills with sound and movement, but the vigilance never stops. This is the reality of being a small bird. Constant awareness, constant readiness, survival measured in split-second decisions, repeated hundreds of times a day. This next section looks at specific strategies prey birds use to reduce their risk of predation. Prey birds don't just react to threats, they actively reduce their risk through behaviour, habitat choice, and social strategies. One of the most effective strategies is flocking. Many small birds, particularly finches, tits, sparrows, feed and move in groups. Flocking provides multiple benefits. More eyes means better predator detection. At least one bird is likely to spot an approaching hawk. The confusion effect is made harder for predators to single out and track an individual. The dilution effect means that any given bird has a lower probability of being caught if they're in a flock. Flocks are dynamic. Birds join and they leave constantly. The flock size changes throughout the day. In the winter, when food is scarce and predation risk is high, flocks tend to be larger and more cohesive. In summer and spring, when birds are breeding and defending their territory, flocking decreases. Not all species flock equally. Robins are territorial and largely solitary outside the breeding season. Dunnocks are less social than finches. Each species balances the benefit of flocking against the other needs, like access to food, maintenance of social status within the group. Another strategy that prey birds use is habitat choice. Birds feeding in the open, on lawns, in fields and on bare ground are more visible and more vulnerable. Birds feeding in or near dense cover, hedges, bushes, brambles, have escape routes that are immediately available. This is why garden feeders near cover are used more heavily than feeders in open areas. Birds prefer to feed where they can retreat quickly. The structure of a habitat also matters. Dense, thorny vegetation like a hawthorn or a blackthorn or brambles provide better protection than sparse and open vegetation. Sparrowhawks are agile, but they can't fly through truly dense cover. Prey birds know and use this. Feeding behaviour also changes in response to predation risk. Birds in high-risk situations feed more quickly and take fewer pauses. They scan more frequently. They position themselves closer to cover. These adjustments are subtle but measurable. and they reduce the amount of time a bird spends vulnerable. Some species also adjust their daily routines. In areas with high sparrowhawk activity, small birds may shift their peak feeding times to periods when hawks are less active, such as early morning and late evening. This isn't a conscious decision, it's a behavioural response shaped by a survival pressure. Mobbing is another strategy, though it's risky. When a sparrowhawk or another predator is detected but not actively attacking, some birds will mob it. Mobbing involves multiple birds approaching the predator, calling loudly and sometimes diving at it. The goal is to harass the predator until it leaves. Mobbing is most common when a predator is perched or is stationary. It's less common when a predator is actively hunting because that is too dangerous. The birds involved are typically not the sparrowhawk's usual prey, like crows, magpies, jays, blackbirds are frequent mobbers, although some smaller species will join in. Mobbing serves several functions. It alerts other birds to predators' presence, it may drive the predator away, and it reduces the predator's effectiveness by making it more conspicuous and harder to hunt by stealth. For sparrowhawks, being mobbed is annoying but isn't particularly dangerous. They're faster and more agile than their mobbers and can leave whenever they choose. But persistent mobbing can disrupt hunting, and sparrowhawks often relocate rather than dealing with it. Prey birds also use vocal mimicry and deception, though this is less common. Some species, particularly corvids and starlings, can mimic the calls of the birds of prey. This can create confusion or trigger false alarms, which may provide a brief advantage in a competitive situation. Whether this is intentional deception or incidental mimicry is debated, but the effect is real. Physical adaptations also play a role for prey birds. Many small birds have cryptic plumage, browns, greys, streak patterns that make them harder to see against a natural background. This camouflage is passive but effective, particularly when a bird is motionless in cover. Some species also have specific escape flights. When flushed by a predator, they'll fly in an erratic, zigzagging pattern rather than in a straight line. This makes them harder to track and catch. Sparrowhawks are fast, but their success depends on predicting the prey's trajectory. Unpredictable flight reduces that success. Despite all these strategies, predation still happens. Sparrowhawks are skilled, persistent, and adaptable. They learn the habits of their prey, and they adjust their tactics accordingly. But the prey birds are also learning. The relationship between predator and prey is dynamic, and both sides are constantly adapting. This is called an evolutionary arms race, and it's been going on for millions of years. The next section looks at what happens when the balance shifts. The relationship between sparrowhawks and their prey is not static. It shifts in response to changes in environment, population size, and behaviour. When sparrowhawk populations were at their lowest, in the 1960s and the 1970s, due to pesticide poisoning, prey bird populations did not suddenly explode. Some species increased slightly, but most were already limited by other factors: habitat, food availability, disease, and competition. The absence of sparrowhawks removed one source of mortality, but it did not fundamentally change the system. When sparrowhawks recovered in the 1980s and 1990s, prey populations did not collapse. Some individuals were taken, as they always had been, but populations remained stable or continued to be shaped by the same factors that had been affecting them all along. This tells us something important. Predation of sparrowhawks. This tells us something important. Predation by sparrowhawks is part of the system, but it's not the dominant force shaping prey populations. What matters more is habitat quality. If landscapes provide good nesting sites, abundant food, and safe roosting areas, Prey birds can sustain healthy population even with predators present. If those things are missing, population declines regardless of predation pressure. This is why the decline of species like house sparrows and song thrushes is not caused by sparrowhawks. These declines are driven by changes in farming practices, loss of hedgerows, reduced insect availability, and other habitat-related factors. Sparrowhawks take individual birds, but they're not driving population-level change. In fact, the presence of predators can indicate a healthy ecosystem. Sparrowhawks only persist where prey is abundant. If sparrowhawks are present and hunting successfully, it means there's enough small birds to support them. The absence of predators is often a sign that something is wrong lower down the system. That said, predation pressure does vary locally and seasonally. In winter, when food is scarce and small birds are stressed, predation can push individuals already weakened over the edge. Birds that are undernourished, sick, or injured are more likely to be caught. In this way, sparrowhawks act as a selective pressure, removing individuals that are less likely to survive anyway. This is sometimes called the doomed surplus concept. Not all birds born in a given year will survive to breed. Many are surplus to the carrying capacity of the habitat. Predators remove some of these surplus individuals, but if predators weren't there, most of these birds would die anyway due to starvation, disease, or other causes. This doesn't mean predation is harmless from the prey's perspective. Obviously, being eaten is bad for the individual bird, but at population level, predation by sparrowhawks is largely compensatory rather than additive. It replaces other sources of mortality rather than adding to them. There are exceptions. In small isolated populations or in populations already under severe stress, predation can become a significant factor for prey birds. But in most landscapes where prey populations are robust enough to tolerate the presence of sparrowhawks, For individual prey birds, the calculation is different. Every day is a balance between feeding, resting, and staying safe. The presence of a sparrowhawk increases the cost of feeding. It requires more vigilance, more interruptions, more energy spent fleeing and hiding. But prey birds manage. They've been doing this for millions of years. And the strategies they use, flocking, alarm calls, habitat choice, vigilance, are effective enough that populations persist. The relationship between predator and prey is not one-sided. They are both shaped by each other. Sparrowhawks under pressure become better hunters. Prey birds under pressure become better at avoiding being caught. The result is a system where both sides are highly adapted and neither has a decisive advantage. This balance is part of what makes ecosystems resilient. Predators and prey coexist, not because one dominates, but because they're both constantly adapting. When humans intervene by removing predators or introducing new species or altering habitats, that's when the balance shifts, and the consequences are often unpredictable. The recovery of sparrowhawks in Europe is a reminder that ecosystems function best when all parts of predators aren't optional extras. They're an integral part of how the system works. For people watching birds in the garden, understanding this relationship adds depths to what you're seeing. That moment when all the birds just vanish isn't random chaos. It's a coordinated response, honed over time. The sparrowhawk flying through isn't a villain. It's part of the same system that produces the songbird you're feeding. Both are worth appreciating. By late winter, as sparrowhawks begin breeding again, prey birds start establishing territories, and the cycle continues. Predators hunt, prey evades, some are caught, most survive. The system persists. Constant pressure, constant adaptation, no winners, just survival. That's it for this two-part look at sparrowhawks and the birds they hunt. If you enjoyed spending time with these birds, you can find more episodes where you usually listen. I'm Ren. Thanks for listening.